My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade and a member of the MetroNow Coalition. I'd like to thank you all for attending. This is our fifth segment in MetroNow's Bus Champion webinar series. Now more than ever, efficient transit systems, especially bus, are critical for keeping us connected, providing affordable transportation, and supporting inclusive economic growth across our region. As many of you know, this is also personal since I ride the bus often. It's my second mode of transportation behind walking. So we want to make sure we have the best systems possible for all of us across the region. It's also no surprise that we across our region are ranked in the top 5 nationally in traffic congestion, which is not a good ranking. So being proactive in keeping up with the region's transit needs to happen now and not later. And if you haven't noticed, traffic congestion is certainly back. And today we're going to talk about ways to use data and information to improve our bus transportation systems. Our panelists are a talented group of transit professionals from across the region, and they'll help us to understand and explore how shared transit data can create a better customer experience. So I'm pleased to introduce Rob Fuentes, President and CEO, Eno Center for Transportation. His group has its thumb on the pulse of transportation policy in our region and across the globe. I also worked with Rob when he served as chair for the Executive Steering Committee for the Washington Area Bus Transformation Project, which is still underway. Next, welcome Allison Davis. She's the Vice President of Planning for WMATA, and she can give us a real overlay of how data is being used for transit operations and growth. Our third panelist is Alan Fye. He's the Director of Programs and Policy for the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and his organization is leading the charge to capitalize on public transit systems and investments in those systems. And finally, I'd like to introduce Michael Helter, the Chief Innovation Officer for the Maryland Department of Transportation and Maryland Transit Authority, where he's focused on preparing to meet our future transit needs. So I want to thank you all so much for being here with us. Looking forward to an interesting conversation. And Rob, I want to start with you and kind of set the stage for us, before we get into the specifics around data and information, but why is bus transit so important and why are we talking about this? And at a broader level, what's going on across our region?
Thanks very much, Jack. Really appreciate it. Really happy to be here with this great panel. And I'm really happy to be talking about bus. I mean, we, as you said up at the beginning, we talk a lot about transportation in this region for all the reasons that you laid out, traffic congestion, and all the other things that go along with the negative parts of it. But we have done so much in this region to be innovative around transportation. We have innovative pricing systems. We have innovative parking systems. It's all the micromobility tools. It's an inarguably very innovative region when it comes to transportation, but we have forgotten about the bus. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Even though we spent a lot of time talking about rail and talking about all these other new technological tools, we've forgotten about the bus over the years. And so part of the reason that this bus transformation project initiated in the first place is because bus is an enormously important part of how our region functions, how our economy functions. And just before the pandemic, really moved just about as many people every single day as Metro Rail did, including all of the different providers in the region, and playing a particularly important role for people who are transit dependent and don't have a lot of options for how they get around. The challenge that we have is that the bus has been treated as a second-class citizen, quite frankly. Buses don't come frequently enough. They fight with the same traffic as cars and taxis do. Bus fares are not really collected or structured in ways that are convenient for riders. And so bus ridership was falling, and people had to rely on it, even though it was very affordable. We weren't paying enough attention. So this region embarked on a really major effort to transform the bus. As Jack said, I was fortunate enough to serve as the chairman of that excellent group with really some of the best thinkers and doers in the region to figure out ways to transform that mode. Making sure that we had better information and data about when buses were coming, providing better information for people, focusing on the bus infrastructure that surrounded the customer experience, making sure that buses had certain priority or dedicated lanes. So all of these things that go into it really important. And I think we're making good progress. And we've seen really excellent models on H and I streets in downtown DC, Montgomery County working on their their high capacity rapid bus network. Fairfax County moving ahead with their service on Route 1. Shared ride shuttle services, lots and lots of things that are happening around the bus, and tremendous amount of ability for us to do different things. But in addition to the infrastructure and all that stuff that gets a lot of attention, a lot of it is about data. It may not sound like the most important things, but when the report came out from the bus transformation committee and the task force, we focused on data. We made sure that that was one of the key recommendations in order for the region to be able to maximize all of this data that was coming in from all of the different providers, because at the end of the day, the customers themselves don't really care whether it's a WMATA bus or a ride-on bus or an ART bus in Arlington. They just want to get where they're going. And so by having standardized data, by making it available across a whole range of different platforms for people, you really do an awful lot to make that customer experience much better. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about what's happening on the federal level, but the federal government is now requiring bus providers, bus services to report data in a standardized format across the country. So regions are all across the United States are going to be able to do the things that we were trying to do here in this region, provide standardized data that is shareable and that the customers and that the technology services can use. I really look forward to this conversation here today. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jack. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks. All right. So let's start to get into it a little bit more, and let's talk about bus data. And maybe Allison, we'll start with you. You know, what are you all doing at WMATA already around data, especially, you know, collecting data? What does that look like, and what data are you collecting?
So thanks again for putting this together. MetroNow is a huge partner of Metro itself. So, and I appreciate your role, Jack, and Rob, your role on leading bus transformation. So data, to Rob's point, right? When we thought about bus transformation and we think about going forward, like data underpins literally everything we do, right? So whether it's schedule on the bus and like GPS, so we know, so we can actually tell you real time when the bus is going to show up at your stop, right? That's what a customer wants to know because they're standing there waiting. So there's like that level of data. There's also, you know, customer data that we collect about, and right now we actually just launched the network redesign, the Better Bus brand that we have, that's going to kind of put the umbrella together around all the different initiatives that we're doing. Long story short, we've got a survey out to collect data from customers, understanding like, what are the barriers? What are your priorities? What are the gaps? What are the needs? Like, how is bus working well for you? What isn't working? Because that will help us as we really think about the network of the future that we need to be competitive and connect people with where they want to go at times of day and times of the week that they need to be traveling. So if you go to wmata.com/betterbus, the survey is now live as of this morning. So it's
even beyond the customer experience, when you talk about operations internally, how are you all using data to inform some of your decision making around, you know, everything from operational priorities, maintenance, issues like that? How do you adjust schedules using data, or to what extent are you doing that, or is that part of where we're going with things?
We are. So there's like an incredible quantity of data, and there's actually, like, I think about, people are like, oh, what more data could you want? And I think a lot of it is actually the quality of the data that we collect, right? And how we make sure that that data is clean and able to be used to like decide and make decisions about, you know, it has traffic come back to your point that we need to redo the schedules and kind of add some time back in, because as the pandemic was going on, obviously traffic was down, so we could you know, we were much more reliable on our service because it wasn't getting bogged down in traffic. So there's a lot of that effort of like, the door opens, we know, like literally as the bus progresses down the route, it's open, people are boarding, like we're able to know level of crowding. And so to the GTFS information, we post GTFS information, which is like schedule and routing and all that kind of stuff. But we also have real-time information, and we also have crowding information, which we rolled out during the pandemic. So it really helps to show like customers, should they wait for the next bus? Are there too many people on there? Is it fine to get on? Which I know was a huge concern for customers earlier in the pandemic.
All right, so I want to pick up on that a little bit, both with Michael and Alan. Or Michael, did you want to jump in on something?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of jumping off what Allison was saying, one of the big things we've seen here, so I oversee our performance management programs here at the agency. And so that's all about big data. And one of the biggest barriers we've had is that it's a lot of times operations has operated a certain way for like 30, 40, 50 years. And the idea and the nuance of big data is very new to apply to the daily operations perspective. And so what we've really had to do over the past few years since we started concentrating on this is work really heavily with our people on the operations side to get them to understand like what this data analysis means. You can't just slap a chart up there and expect people to understand what that data is going to mean. And so it's a long process to basically partner with your fellow coworker, kind of across the aisle. A lot of times there's administrational side and there's the operational side, and you really need to create those connections there and understand that this is new to them as well, and walk them through this. So we had to sit with dispatchers and get them to understand why putting an assignment to a bus in real time was important. Because if a bus is not assigned to a block in real time, we're not going to get real time information to the passenger waiting for it at the end of the stop. Because in the past it didn't matter, because that didn't go out to the person waiting at the stop. And so it's those types of things, bringing it all the way to the front lines to let them know that they are a critical part to this big data solution. And when we first started, we didn't realize that, and it was we got a big comeuppance when we realized, like, why isn't this working? And it's because we didn't take care to understand how our fellow employees were actually utilizing the data and if they could utilize it. So that's a big part of this big data transformation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you're making. And it's one of the things that we think about here at the Board of Trade too. And it's broader than just transportation, but we tend to continue operating somewhat in the analog world. Our business processes, our organizational structures, the way we approach the regulatory environment and other things. Yet we're now in a more digital world. And so how is it that we re-engineer for that? So I want to dig into that a little bit further as we move forward, but I did want to pause for a minute. And Allison, you mentioned the GTFS and some of the federal requirements. Maybe, Rob, could you help us understand what is that, what's going on there, and why is that important?
Yeah, it may not sound important to a lot of folks, but it's certainly important to operators and to researchers and to folks who care about this stuff. The Federal Transit Administration changed the reporting requirements to the National Transit Database, which exists. It's for transit providers. All that receive federal funds are required to submit data into this National Transit Database. This is a direct result of the database has existed, but the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that passed last year required the federal the recipients of federal money to provide new data samples, to provide more timely information, but also to provide it in this GTFS standard, which is the general, let me read this, General Transit Feed Specifications. People always think it's Google, but it's general. And it is a standardized format that can be shared, as I said, across agencies, across providers, but also across private partners, right? And so we talk a lot about the public agencies that are providing the services, and obviously that matters, but think about all of the private technology providers that for Google Maps or for GIS and all of the different programs you may have on your phones. All of that can be used and standardized in a way that makes all those tools work. Because again, at the end of the day, the customer doesn't really care who the service provider is. They don't really care where they're getting the information, but they need that data in a specified format. And think just about the way that we pay fares. We have 8 different providers in this region, I think 9 different providers. If you had to pay different, you had to have different payment formats for each one, it would be a very inconvenient and almost useless system. The data specification, the data standardization functions in the same way. So they're gonna have to start doing that 2023, 2024.
Okay, and Alan, can talk to us a little bit about what's that going to enable us to do differently or better, and how might that impact the customer compared to what it is that they currently are experiencing?
So first of all, thank you for pulling this together. Absolutely fascinating conversation so far. But yeah, jumping right into GTFS, MVTC uses data in a little bit different way than my colleagues here do. We don't actually operate service on a day-to-day basis. We function as a regional entity, but the data that all of our transit providers, including Metro and all the 6 providers on this side of the river, all pull together. We take all the data that they create with GTFS, pull that together, and we do a lot of different policy analysis. We use it a little bit of a different way. We pull it up to that 40,000 foot level, start doing that analysis to see how we can improve bus. One of the things we're actually getting ready to embark on soon is taking all that data and looking at the Northern Virginia region. That's going to be a very, very data intensive process. Look at the services out there, agnostic of provider, because you're right, Robert. They don't care who's showing up. Whatever, as long as the bus shows up at my corner and I can get on and go where I need to go, nobody cares. So we're taking that step back, pulling all the data together from everybody, going to take a look at where are their gaps, where are their opportunities, how can we make sure that we're getting the right level of service and the right type of service to the right areas that need it. And so that's an effort we going on pretty soon in the future here at MVTC. On the GTFS side, obviously we have the federal requirement coming down the road. I was talking to some of my colleagues internally, and actually the Department of Rail and Public Transportation here in Virginia has provided technical assistance over the last couple of years to get all of the Commonwealth transit providers onto GTFS. They're either on it now or working towards it. So it's one of those things where I think that that's positioning the transit providers in Virginia to really be ready to go when that requirement hits. We're ready to hit the ground running, and then we're ready to actually start getting that data, using it, manipulating it, see how we can improve things at a regional level here over in Virginia, using all that data and crunching it. We've got a great data team over here. We're going to pull stuff together. We pull data regularly from Metro, from all the wonderful portal they put up about a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago. Pull data out of that, so we can look at that and work together. We're going to be working on our own portal coming soon. Not quite ready for prime time yet, but we're working on something. So we'll have lots of portals we can send people to, and they can really learn about it, and they can actually play with some of that data as well. So there's different ways that you can use it here in Virginia. They can learn about the system, and then how do we make their service on a day-to-day better.
That's it. So it's interesting. All right. So there's a lot that's already going on with regards to data collection, data integration. Maybe, Michael and Allison, could you talk a little bit too about what Alan is raising there about some of the integrated programs or platforms that you already have in place around this, and how are you preparing to get to the next level of integration as these requirements are coming online over the next couple of years? Our region often talks a lot about collaboration. We don't always do it very well, whether it's route optimization or other types of issues that we work through. So how is it that you're preparing for this?
So I have two things. One on GTFS, right? So we've been posting, like I've said, we've had GTFS for many years. And I think the key thing that we hadn't been doing, but are now, is archiving, right? Because from Google or the transit app, or, fill in the blank for whatever app of your choices, right, is pulling from our data feed. So we only want them to have whatever the current piece of information is, right? But for all that analysis that Alan's talking about, right? Like, we're starting our network redesign, and people are like, well, are you going to talk about pre-COVID, right? 2019, or are you talking about now? And so if we hadn't archived all of that information and kept all that, we would be able to recreate it, but it would be super labor and data intensive, as opposed to being able to archive that. So that's my plug, to make sure that you're not having to use the Wayback Time Machine on the web and try and figure out what was being operated. On something like the network redesign, we're thinking there is both the data about people who ride and that type of customer data, what are people choosing to do right now. We also have surveys, which is that qualitative, what are preferences and what do people think about what it should be. But then we also have the cell phone data that helps us see all of the trips in the region, because transit is my preferred mode of choice after walking, like you, Jack, but people are moving about in many different ways, and at different times of day. Transit's actually not like one of the biggest modes of travel out there. And so where can we be more competitive? How do we look at like that whole space and understand where people are trying to go? And they might not be taking transit because we don't serve it, but we could, and we could serve it well. So how do we kind of, it's that mashup between like all the trips that are happening, which is like big level, and then trying to think about it in terms of like, what is it that we could serve, and how do we make it effective, right? And that's the performance management that Michael was talking about, because that's a full day long conversation in its own right about how we're measuring the service that we put out there, and how the decisions we're making to make that better.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah.
how are you all dealing with that? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. So we kind of took the stance a few years ago that in lieu of building our own tools, we were going to try and create kind of industry leading data. And so that all of the transits, the Googles, the MoveIts, the whoever's using that information gets the best, the highest quality, the most accurate, the most consistent data possible. And so we actually about a few months ago launched our last GTFS RT feed. We have 5 modes. So we have light rail, metro, commuter bus, local bus, and commuter rail. And so now we have all 5 of those up, reporting in RT. And we got them all stood up now. And our biggest thing looking into the future is looking at the alternate modes that people can take. Almost every single one of those modes, people can get real-time information when their trip isn't going to go as planned. On transit, that's a tougher thing, is putting out these different service alerts, making sure people are aware that your trip is not going to go as you had planned, but here are your options to go. And so we're looking at the GTFS and really kind of pushing the boundaries of some of the service alerts and service modifications tools that are in there to see if we can move towards a more dynamic system. The GTFS is great, but it's kind of static. It's really hard to update. Your different vendors might pick it up once every 3 days. They might pick it up once every 1 day, every week. So if you make an update on the fly, that might not matter because that vendor might not pick it up. And so as we all move to this more standardized practice, the vendors will start to come along and maybe update some of those frequency rates. And as the agencies, we need to be in a place where we can move more dynamically, because there's nothing worse than waiting for a bus and having it not show up and having no idea why. That just tells you the system doesn't respect me. They don't respect my time. And I'm going to find something else to do. I'm going to find a different way to get there. And that's not the situation we want to be in. So we need to strive to kind of like treat our riders as if they were like one of our family members and let them know what's going on. And so that's where the GTFS, the future of that is kind of moving towards, is that ability to have really fantastic, like dynamic service information, not just purely your bus is going to arrive at this time, but everything outside of that you want to know when you most need it.
Yeah, that's, that resonates a lot with me because I happen to be lucky because there's a metro stop right across the street from my bus stop. And if a bus doesn't show up, I get very disappointed because I was set on taking the bus, but I have an option. Not everybody always has that option. And so how is it that we can minimize that for the overall rider experience? One thing is we're talking about the GTFS, aside from the archiving of data, if we think about it, was there a real difference between real-time data and data that you're collecting and using through those systems?
Go for it, Michael.
I was gonna say, so we used the idea that we now have real-time information on every single one of our modes takes us leaps beyond where we were in the past on the ability to understand how our service functions. And so now we know where every single vehicle was at every single time. We know which operators were on what vehicles. We know dwell times, all this stuff that we might have had some idea. But because we want to meet a customer expectation, that means we have to have strong real-time data, which on the back end, it gives us amazing operational data to do stuff with.
Okay, Allison, did you have any other insights on that, or?
I did. So a couple of things that Michael brought up. So he is correct, right? Right now, like we could tell you how your buses do it, like the bus line, the bus route that you take, right? Like, is it delayed? Is there, you know, a festival down on Pennsylvania Avenue and there's a detour? What we are moving toward is actually stop level. So that way we know, right? Like if you know, there was something, an accident, snow, whatever, you can come up with something that like maybe your stop is no longer open, or, you know, not open today. Like, we are working towards getting that stop level information out to people, right? You'd have to subscribe to say, you know, this is my stop, or these couple of ones are my stop, but that's a way to start getting information at a much more granular level. And I will say that we also have done a lot of work to understand like the cost of these low bus speeds, right? And so that the data about like the door opens, we know people are boarding, right? Because you match up where the stop is and where the bus is, right? So you know that that's activity. That's why we run a bus, is to pick up people, right? And transport them. But then, you know, like, all right, you see what the speeds are. You're getting that off the bus. You know it's slow. Therefore, there's traffic, right? And so you're able to put together, and shows that we spend about $70 million in this region for buses to sit in traffic. And so it's like that level of data that helps us then connect to the operators of the roads, right? The cities and counties in the region, to say like, hey, this is somewhere that we need, maybe it's transit signal priority, maybe it's a queue jump, maybe it's actually like red paint, like on HNI and 16th Street and other places in the region where our jurisdictional partners have been really prioritizing bus in the region. So it's taking the data that we get from like tire by tire rotation and like making it into policy and different decisions that we're making about street space for buses. Because Michael had a great point. Like, you stand there and you wait for a bus and it doesn't show up, like, you've lost, like, it's just not a reliable mode of transportation. And then you put in the level of frequency, which on some bus lines is not frequent. So if you've got another half an hour to wait, you're going to find some other way. Or if you don't have the money, you're going to like have to spend an hour waiting, kind of building that into your trip. And that's time that is money to people. So it does really break down into like choices that people are making and like reliability.
I want to play off with something that Allison said, but I was talking to my team yesterday, and I was asking them, what kind of data, what would be better data that you all want? And they said granularity. That was the first thing that came out of their mouth, is like, we have it up here. How do we keep digging down deeper and deeper and deeper? And I think that's one of those things, any way that there is possible to get that level of data and sharing it with folks, because you're right, Allison, to figuring out what we can do, those targeted low-hanging fruit. Because let's be honest, we're not going to build rail lines everywhere. BRT, let's be honest, takes time as well. But there's a lot of those really small things that you talked about, that priority, which I think is a really big, important part of what's going to come out of the bus transformation project anyway. You know, shout out to Allison's colleagues in the bus priority division. They're doing a lot of stuff trying to get at that, trying to get at those low-hanging fruit, easy places we can really, really improve bus in the short term until we build more infrastructure down the road to really help those people along. I think that level of granularity, the more that all of us that are working in the transit world can build that and share that with everybody, it's only going to help us make those decisions. Because we know sometimes competing for money in the transit world is very competitive. I mean, you see that with all the programs that come out, there's only a limited amount. So we're going to get the most bang for the buck when it comes to that. Then how are we going to prioritize it in the place that hits those communities that need it the most, those riders that need it the most, and those bus routes that need it the most. So as much data as possible is always going to be, I think, appreciated by all of those folks out there that are trying to make bus better.
And to jump off of Alan's point there about granularity and GTFS and the private industry, we were contacted by one of the cloud signal control companies that are kind of starting to pop up these days. And so basically they came to us and they were doing a pilot for one of the nearby counties. And they said, we can ingest the GTFS, which was amazing to hear, like a non-transit company even knew what those initials were. They're like, we can ingest this if you provide it to us. Since we're like, hey, check our website, it's right there. And as they started looking at it, they were, we have it down to about 10 seconds, our ping frequency on our bus system. And they said, that's great, but if you could really get it down to 3 to 5 seconds, that could really help with basically their dynamic transit signal priority system that they were trying to set up. And so speaking to granularity, to Alan's point, if we can get our systems to somehow bump up that frequency rate to being more frequent, that allows kind of some of the really cool kind of like combined infrastructure companies that are coming out there with cloud computing and machine learning and all that stuff. Since we have a standard form of the GTFS, another region has it, because it sounds like NVTC is doing it. I know WMATA does it. I know pretty much most of Maryland does it. Like now these types of efforts could almost be regionally scaled out because all of our information is on the same format.
So Rob, let's dig on that a little bit. We talked a lot about during the transformation project work and continuing around, what is it that would make bus more attractive? Dedicated bus lanes, synchronized traffic control systems, and a whole host of other things around there. As what Michael's talking about here is how data is going to enable us to do some of those kinds of things. Let's talk a little bit more about that, and how do you see that playing out? And are there any best cases out there in your world that we might learn from here in our region?
Think about that last one, but the bottom line is that we've spent a lot of time, as we talked about at the beginning, we spent a lot of time outfitting the rest of the entire transportation system, everything from aviation to electric scooters and everything in between. But we haven't done that for the bus in so many different places, right? And it matters so much now. This was brought into sharp relief during the pandemic, right? When we saw people working from home, and you saw complete drops in ridership, like for commuter rail, for example. VRE dropped almost completely. Metro rail dropped 80, 90%, but the bus didn't, right? It didn't drop that much, 60, maybe 50%, which is still significant, but it illustrates the fact that people not only didn't have enough options for how they get around, like Jack and Allison talked about, but they may not have had options for how they're working, and they still, these were our frontline workers, so they had to go in. So the point here I wanted to make is that we've not only neglected the bus as a mode in years, not just here in this region, but around the country, but we've neglected the people who rely on that mode more than other people do. So that really matters. And we have to think about all of these technological advances for the people who may not have smartphones. They may not have the ability to take advantage of the real-time data that I'm able to take advantage of, all the cool apps that I love. I know exactly when my 28A is coming right down here on Route 7. So I know with such precision, and it makes it very reliable for me, but a lot of people don't have those same options. But it does matter because you can do things, Jack, to your point, a lot of the stops you've seen, especially in the district, with real-time information at the bus stops, right? So if you don't have a smartphone, you don't have the ability to access data the same way somebody like me does, you still have it there publicly available, in these stops and in these stations. So the idea is to use this data and use technology to put bus, if not on par, making it better than a lot of these other modes. So you can not just serve the riders who depend on it, but to get choice riders and the folks who do have options, Jack, like you were saying, where you can catch the bus there at Farragut Park. And I thought when I talk about it, I think about other regions around the country that are doing things better. There's not anybody that really stands out. I feel embarrassed I can't think of one, but I will say that a lot of other places are doing the same thing, right? I mean, there is bus transformation activities that are happening in dozens of places around the country, in Los Angeles and Seattle and Houston. Boston is starting one now. And there's an insatiable demand, I think, right now for agencies to learn from one another. So the fact that this standardization isn't just for this region, right, that it actually is national, is a really, really good thing, because agencies are talking to one another, they're taking ideas, they're learning from each other, they're scaling, they're replicating it, and they're tailoring it for their own regions. And that's really, really great idea. It's really promising.
Oh, that's great. Alan, so it strikes me interesting. You all recently put out your list of transportation investment priorities across Northern Virginia. How is it that your planning process is changing because of this data and your access to this data? And is it beginning to demonstrate a changing perspective of what priorities need to be or should be?
I think it is. It's really, we've gotten to the place in the transit world where, let's say, Google and Apple and Amazon, all these other really big companies, they've been able to monetize big data, and we're finally catching up there when it comes to the transport, which is why we're putting so much time and effort into making sure that we're building this small, or not small, giant database of information that's coming out there, because we needed to make good decisions and we needed to be able to prioritize. There are transportation priorities that Virginia has. We've got to figure out, we're constantly growing. We're growing at a rapid race. We can't survive, we can't be effectively and economically competitive if everybody's driving. As I think Robert mentioned earlier, traffic's back. I had to drive yesterday. It was terrible. Tolls are crazy. It's just, that part's back, but transit is struggling. So I think part of using this data and building this like empire of data and really sharing it across the Commonwealth, across the greater region, is going to help us prioritize that, because we can't build our way out of congestion. So we have to keep investing back into transit. Rail lines take forever. Commuter rail is expensive. There's challenges and all that, but bus is the one where it's relatively cheaper mode in the grand scheme of things, but it's flexible. And I think that's the part that really people miss out sometimes. Is like, okay, we love our great rail that's going out to Silver Line out to Dulles Airport, but it can't pivot and move like bus can. And bus allows us to constantly be reevaluating what's there. Data allows us to keep reevaluating what's there. You figure out travel patterns change. Where's the best place to put that? You can do that in real time, maybe not day to day, but then a couple times a year. I think Metro twice a year has a service change. I think all of our local jurisdictions over here, at least twice a year, change and adapt their service. That data is what's driving that, because I've worked as a service planner at the beginning of my career. That data that churned out of all those systems really drove every single one of those. And that adaptability and flexibility, I think, is what's going to keep bus at the forefront. And I think if we keep capitalizing on that flexibility with this great data, is going to allow us to continue to make bus more and more competitive by being able to adapt quickly on the fly.
Okay, that's great.
I was gonna pivot on that. Something that's we talk a lot about data and having more granular data, and like that just calls out how much we need data science in this industry, right? We're hired, we've got a huge performance office, my office in planning, we've got a whole data analytics team, and we're currently hiring. But like putting out there that like that level of like getting into the data, connecting everything, because literally those, we've got 1,500 buses that are out there running. Like if every 3 seconds that data is coming off the bus, the amount of data, and so it is, a lot. So how we pull that together and how we connect everything such that decisions can actually be made in a timely fashion. And I think that's like the connection that we are trying desperately to keep making, because it's a really competitive job market, as everyone knows. But like having those data science, data analytics, those teams that can do the really heavy work to make everything connected, and then have the people who actually understand that and can pull out the key things such that, whether it's the operations team, the maintenance team, whomever has the right information, and like it makes sense for them to do something with it, because data for data's sake helps no one. So I think that's just something that, like, as I'm hearing this whole conversation, I was like, that was something that really kind of is clear by the work that we're doing.
I think that transforming that data and having the people that can manipulate it and turn it into something digestible for those of us that are not data guru, that's why we have teams of people that can help us with that. And to take it to that next level, having good quality data helps us when we go and talk to our legislature down in Richmond, when we go to talk to elected officials across the region. We have to be able to show up with them. It's like, look, here's what we're seeing. We have to be able to sell the idea. We need continued investment in transit. We need continued dedication to that. And having that data that really backs it up becomes part of that story, because you do need to go talk to them. You do need to sell them on that idea. One of the things we're doing right now at METC is we're looking at what is the value of transit in Northern Virginia to the Commonwealth? We've done it in the past for Metro Rail and VRE, but we expanded this time. We wanted to include the bus network is just as important as those heavy rail modes. So how are we going to monetize and put a value to the economic growth and the economic engine of Northern Virginia and the Commonwealth, turn that into a make sure bus is a big part of that. So when we talk to our legislators, go down and it's like, look, this is all the value that transit is doing. And the baseline of all of that is, we had our kickoff meeting not too long ago, is do we have good data that we can feed into this? So we can really, really make sure that they're understanding and that we have solid data that we can sell this idea that this is a benefit to the Commonwealth, regardless of the political spectrum that happens to be in power as things move back and forth across the region, nationally, et cetera. If you've got good data, you can help sell that to folks and really, really convince them that it is that important.
Yeah, Allison, you touched on, actually, I have a question for Michael, but Allison, you touched on this sort of the transformation internally to get more and more people to understand and rely on and utilize the data. And that's part of, I think, this transition, because oftentimes, we'll find too, is that you'll put a lot of really well substantiated data in front of someone. It's still not enough to change their mindset. They're really locked in on what it is that they think they know or what they want to do on something. So Michael, how are you dealing with that and the issues that Alan was raising as well? Do you feel that you're getting the support that you need from elected officials and agency officials? Is data a management priority within your agencies? And is it really something that they're relying on as a critical tool for how you operate?
Yeah, so I want to say starting about 4 or 5 years ago, started with our last CEO. He took a real hard angle on trying to improve our data quality, the use of data within the agency, using data for decision making. And so we pivoted pretty hard on that, and we built that up, and that continues through with our current leadership. One thing I'll say, kind of bouncing off what Allison was saying, is that the data scientists are so incredibly important. I have a core of just brilliant minds. One thing that we notice and to note is that things look good on paper and on the computer screen, but they might actually mean something else out on the street. And so every one of my data scientists is almost a daily, if not weekly, rider of the service. And so they understand kind of what transit is. And so that really gives you a perspective as to what this data can do and where data can be wrong, because the data can be clean, but it could point to something that you're going to be missing, a huge thing that you're not even realizing. And one thing we're trying to push here at the agency to promote buy-in, so we have good senior level buy-in on data, is basically putting a program in place that requires almost every management level person to ride the service at a certain frequency, to get out there and understand what it's like to wait on the curb, to see if the real-time information is good, to see if the shelters are clean, to see if the buses are clean, to see what it's like to ride the service. I think you can't replace experiential data. And so we jump into this big data stuff, but it has to be paired with a grounded understanding of what that means on the opposite end. And so when we talk about getting buy-in, we can have some folks in our agency say, well, the numbers are looking pretty good. And it's like, all right, we'll go ride the service for a week and tell us if you think it's going really well. And when they hit a few hiccups, then they start to realize, all right, well, it's more than just the numbers. And so then they want the numbers to be better. It's like, hey, how can we actually capture that part of the experience in our data? Like what factors can we get that allow us to somehow quantify that, qualify, the quality data. So to promote buy-in, one of the big things I think is you have to blend experience with the actual numbers. And that's something that we're working on up at MTA and promoting that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Rob, how, as you think more broadly across different systems that you're working with, it seems that we've crossed this threshold now that data and data analytics are core to operations. And so where do we go next? Where does this take us now that, we're looking at, current operations, to Michael's point, how do you blend that with, both real-time data and real-time experience? But where do we go next?
Yeah, it really does matter how we actually operationalize this. I love this conversation between the operators there, because I love this phrase that all the data doesn't matter if it just enables us to make bad decisions faster, right? So we really do need to make sure that we're not just using the data and providing it for customers and all that really matters, but it really should change the way that agencies operate and the way that providers make decisions about capital investments, about operation plans and things that they're doing. Again, because it's not just data for data's sake, as Allison said, it really does matter. So it's great to hear at the MTA that there's buy-in from this at the senior levels. We've seen a lot of agencies around the country where that's not the case, right? Where a lot of places are operating on autopilot, but things have fundamentally changed so much in transportation over the last 3 years. Everybody knows that. We don't have to talk about those details, but it really means that place after place after place is fundamentally rethinking their entire transportation network. And even though transit has had enormous challenges over the last few years, nobody's going to sugarcoat that. We still are going to need transit service over the next throughout the rest of American history, because we need cities to function, and cities can't function if we don't have robust transit service. So but this does give us the opportunity now to think about transformation, not just here in the region, but around the country. What does the transportation system of the future look like? And how do we use data to inform those decisions? If we're not doing that last part, then we're back to where we started from in the first place.
So when we close everything out in a few minutes, I want to ask that question of all of you, Rob, that you just raised too, is, what would be the one thing that you would imagine where we'd like to be at some point in time as we continue to go down this path? So what does that future vision begin to look like? But right now, and part of getting there too, is that, particularly Allison and Michael, from your perspective, what are some additional tools that you are deploying to really help you use this data more effectively? Are you using artificial intelligence agents, and are you building those that capacity internally? Are you working with partners to do that? What does that look like? And then, as we move into a 5G world, for example, and so we have better working, better communications platforms out there, do you envision this ever getting to on-demand bus service? And what might that look like? And are there certain cases where we might be able to do things like that?
So I'm going to take your first question first. So thinking about like the bus of the future, right? Which people want frequent, reliable, affordable bus service, right? Like that's like, but like the frequency is critical, and then the reliability. Like, is it going to take me reliably 20 minutes to get there, 30, like whatever that number is, like, is it sometimes 20 minutes and sometimes 45? Like, how do I build that in, right? So if I think about like bus for the future, it is lots of red paint on those dedicated lanes, right? And it's super frequent transit, right? Kind of across the region. I'm obviously biased in why I feel that passionately about it, but it's very much about how we're using the data to build that case that's why, like, that's the kind of service that our customers deserve. And frankly, I think Alan made the point, like in the future with more people coming, more jobs, climate change is real. Like, we need to change how we are moving around this region. And so, land use is a challenge, right? And where housing is and where jobs are, like, they are separated for a lot of people in the country or in the region. So, how we're making those connections so that they're able, even if it's bus to Metro Rail, and then it's or MARC or VRE, so it's like faster into wherever you need to go. But it's not just jobs, it's like all day. People are traveling throughout the day, and especially a lot of our bus customers are not AM, PM peak period riders, which is where we think about like transit being the most useful. It's making sure that all day, all week, Saturday, Sunday, same level of frequency so that people are actually able to get where they need to go quickly.
Okay, great. Michael, any?
You mentioned kind of AI, machine learning, and different. So we've strategically tried to partner with some vendors in the industry who are we think are very effective at some of that machine learning when it comes to prediction accuracy. We partner with a company that they basically create all of our predictions, but they also do some logic when a vehicle isn't going where maybe it should be going. They'll actually decouple that prediction if we weren't quick enough to catch it on our end, or if we have a vehicle out there that we were not able to get an assignment on, they can intelligently start to understand that, oh, this might be on that route, pump that in, and now the rider gets a real-time prediction for that bus. So it kind of covers for some of the areas that we're not able to get to, and expands our ability to provide good real-time information. We work with some other kind of, not just the data creation vendors, but also the vendors that are conveying that information to the public. So we have a partnership with Transit App. And so we are continuously pushing them to advance kind of the offerings that they provide to our riders. Anybody in our service area can use any of the apps that are available, because we make it available. So Google can, Google's made some big jumps, I want to say, in the last like 3 months, onto their real-time passenger facing information, some serious jumps that we haven't seen in a while. And so that's great. Options are great. And that's part of providing this data out to people. So I think for us, it's continuing to provide fantastic data, and continually improving that, never being satisfied with the information that we put out there. And then really thinking and anticipating from a communications perspective what our riders need to know, when they need to know it, how they need to receive it, and getting that in front of their eyes, in front of however they get that information, getting it there in a timely manner, so that our riders are informed. I think information is key. Big data can help us get there, but getting those systems in place to make that consistent, and making sure that our riders they know, like they are confident that the agency is going to take care of them with that information. They don't have to guess, oh, is this bus actually coming even though I see this? Like, no, they know for sure that thing is coming or it's not coming, and we're taking care of them. And that's where I think kind of the next step is, outside of infrastructure improvements, TSP, red lanes, dedicated, all that type of stuff is absolutely important. But at the base of it, if you don't trust that the agency is going to use all the tools at their disposal, then you might think of using something else. And there's I think it's the stat, like if a person has a bad experience, they tell like 10 people. If they have a good experience, they tell like 2 people. And so the more bad experiences we're providing, the more we are allowing that kind of sentiment and kind of perspective to generate all around the agency, all around the industry, or the region. And we need to nip that and turn that into the different 180, hit the other direction, and get some positive experiences and get people talking like, oh, I rode the bus. It didn't come, but then it told me to go over to this street and take that bus. It was fantastic. It came right on time. Boom, I was there. I didn't miss my meeting. It's a great story, right? We're not there yet, but we need to get there.
Okay. Hey, Rob, so we've talked a lot here about specifically dedicated bus data collection and how that improves services. Are there other data sets that we can use to augment this from an outcome perspective? So one of the questions that popped up is that how do we use data more effectively to support the zero emissions bus pilot program? So are there other ways that we can use this data to achieve some of the objectives that we're looking at?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I'm a big believer in all the data for all the reasons that have been mentioned, but it can only tell us so much, right? I mean, so especially for the region's equity and inclusion goals, right? So if we can use this data, we can couple it with demographic and economic data so we can understand not just the efficiencies of the system that everybody here knows that we need to do. It actually matters that we're actually running an efficient system, but again, that we're serving the people who really need it the most, and we can make those strategic decisions, those strategic policy decisions. We can look at where transit deserts are. We can look at whether or not people in certain neighborhoods, especially disadvantaged neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that are uniquely relying on the bus service, are counting on it. I think that everything that we talked about before around making the political case for these improvements really matters. I love the idea of going to Richmond and talking about the role of bus as in supporting an economically competitive region, an economically competitive state by extension. So again, it's one thing to provide data for the customers. It's one thing to provide it for the agency that can run the system, but then we can use that and couple it with everything else to make these bigger policy goals that the region and the agencies have said that they support.
All right, that's great. So as we close things out, let's we'll go around and Alan, I'll start with you. You know, one thing that you'd want people to walk away from this conversation.
I think the big thing is that commitment to doing this. Like all of us are out there, all the folks that are out there, they're listening and watching. Commitment to transit in general, and then also understanding that that is going to, by definition, help some of these efforts that we're talking about. It's like keeping that commitment at the political level, at the personal level, at the community level, in transit and in bus. It's like, don't forget about bus. It is the backbone most of the time of the region, the folks that move the bus. We talked a little bit about where the stats are now, but don't forget about bus. It's really important, and by default, get out there and help advocate for these types of things, because they are really important. Some of these things cost money, and it's really important for people to understand the good that can come of it. And all the things that Michael was just talking about and Allison talked about, there's a lot of good that we could really solve some of those really important policy issues and concerns that we have through the bus, and getting good data will help us do it even better.
Great. Allison.
So there has, with our new general manager, there's been a big push to be more transparent with a lot of the data that we have. So I will say, if you, the collective you, are out there trying to make a case to make bus better, we are happy to partner with you to make the case with the data that we have, right? There's a lot of, again, we operate a lot of buses on a lot of routes. So getting down to that granular level in your neighborhood on the bus route that you are really pushing for, we need to know that that's where the conversation's happening. So please feel free to reach out, because we are happy to partner with you.
All right, great. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, Allison and Alan kind of hit every nail on the head there, and I'll kind of reiterate the importance for the growth of kind of the data scientist analyst industry, and how much it will help this industry, and our private partners who are developing ways to use this information in new and amazing ways. Those groups are going to be critically important in the future. I think historically, this industry has kind of been dominated by a few big players on the private side, and the more of the innovative, agile thinking vendors and companies that we have out there creates more competition and forces everybody to up their game. And so, yeah, the more involvement on the private side, the more it helps everybody, gives more options, yeah, I think helps us to use that glut of data. I mean, Allison said every 3 seconds. I'm jealous. We're going to get there, but that's a lot of data. You got to figure out what to do with it. You can archive it, but there's a whole lot of infrastructure you need to build just to be able to utilize that data. And so help from the outside parties would be fantastic.
That's great. Rob.
I agree with all this. It's been a great conversation. I'll just end with the vision for the bus transformation project, Jack, on which you served, and a whole bunch of other really smart people. That the bus will be the mode of choice on the region's roads by 2030, serving as the backbone of a strong and inclusive regional mobility system. It's a big goal. It was intentionally audacious, but we're the nation's capital. We're the capital of the world. We should absolutely have the nation's most world-class bus system. No reason why we can't, and data is a really important way to get us there.
All right, I agree with that. Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you. I mean, you never know when you start out a conversation about data and then add bus to it, where you're going to go. And I thought that was both interesting, compelling, and really important. And we need to keep this conversation going. So thank you all so much for sharing your insights and thoughts with us today. You know, Rob, Allison, Alan, and Michael, great job. And, you know, we applaud everything that you're doing, and we'll continue to work with you to realize that vision, Rob, as you put it out there. Let me just mention, you know, our MetroNow partners, the Coalition for Smarter Growth, the 2030 Group, the Federal City Council, Greater Washington Partnership, the Prince George's County, the Prince George's Chamber of Commerce, the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and the Tyson's Partnership. Thank you to all of you and others that are working with us to continue to push and move this forward. Any more information, please check out MetroNow at our website. And with that, it's 10 o'clock, and I wish everybody a really good day and a nice weekend. And thank you very much for joining. And thank you all again for spending this time with us. Very, very appreciated.
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.